G'day, Internet.
All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
7800 plus, and the Spectrum, and a full-size Amiga, and a PC-88 Mini.
EmuDeck SteamOS-based TV console.
And the final truth about Amiga. All this and more coming up on this week's show.
Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
And welcome to our guest, Mr. Lurch, who has been missing from the internet for about a year. Welcome to This Week in Retro. You've been on before. Welcome back to This Week in Retro. It's fantastic to have you here. Where have you been?
Thanks, mate. Hiding. So I can now prove to the internet that I'm not dead. I basically just needed to step away from the whole thing for a while. As anyone in YouTube probably knows, you get to a point where you're just kind of feeding the beast and spending every single weekend trying to put content together on top of a full-time job. And so I just decided I needed to step away and have a break, and so I did.
Well, welcome back. Are you going to make videos again?
I've always said never say never. But if I do decide to put something out, it will be something that I legitimately just want to share. I do have a couple of little ideas in the back of my head. I did actually make a guest appearance recently on the Retro channel with Mark. Because for those that don't know, Mark actually just lives like 10 minutes up the road from me. And we actually had a lot of fun. We were just fixing a couple of 1084 monitors, and it just turned into a blithering mess, and it was hilarious.
There's a vital question that needs to be asked. We had fake Australian Chris on a couple of weeks ago, and he was telling us about Roo shoes. So we need to ask a real Australian, have you heard of Roo shoes? Are kangaroos a problem where you are? And do they work, or are they snake oil?
Roo shoes, never heard of him, never heard of it. Chris is full of, but yes, we have plenty of kangaroos around, especially in Canberra. You probably hear the touristy stories of, we've got kangaroos jumping down the main street of town. Well, in Canberra, which is like Australia's capital city, we actually do. Because Canberra's completely surrounded by bush, especially when things start getting a bit dry over winter. Yeah, we'll have kangaroos the whole way through the city.
These are little plastic devices that make some kind of whistling noise that's supposed to chase the roos away and stop your car driving into them. But even Chris was skeptical about them, but he said, well, for a couple of dollars, why not stick them on? What's the harm in it?
Right. Okay. That makes a bit more sense. You said Roo shoes, and I'm thinking, why has he got shoes made out of kangaroos? Shoes as in sure way?
Yeah.
Yes, they do exist. They're little kind of whistly things that people stick on the front of their cars. Sorry, I thought you were talking about things you put on your feet.
So did I. When Chris was explaining it until I went, SHOO.
Right, okay. So thanks for that explanation, previous Chris. Well done. Yes, those things do exist. Do they work? I got no idea. Some people swear by them. I just think they've been unlucky and never really come across a roo at the wrong time and at the wrong speed.
You will roo running into a roo.
Yeah.
Have you got into any new hobbies in the past year? Because I know you're into loads of them.
Yeah, really? You're thinking there's the 3D printer and stuff and my record player. No, I've not really a hobby per se, but I've kind of been getting a bit more into the yard, so to speak. So over the last 12 months, I've done a lot of landscaping out in the back, which is actually good. It turns out that, when you're kind of over 40, spending a weekend or a day or whatever, just out in the yard, just with no pressure, digging holes or whatever, is actually quite relaxing. And then you finish the day and you sit out on the patio and you kind of with a cider or whatever in your hand and you go, I achieved something.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. How's your week been, Reese?
How has my week been? Okay.
2 weeks, in fact.
I've
2
been
weeks, 3
working on-
weeks. 3 weeks since you've been on
Yeah,
here,
I've been
isn't it?
working on a couple of videos. Had all sorts of issues with them. I think those issues are finally sorted now. So hopefully I can get something out the door again. But
Fantastic.
other than that, not a lot.
I know there's more to it than that you can't see.
It'll be something Atari related.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I'm staring at right now is definitely Atari related.
Yeah, as it should be. This week, I've fallen into another rabbit hole. I fall into rabbit holes all the time, and it is the idea of connecting a CRT to a modern computer for games, and it's ended up me taking this computer I'm going to use for my virtual pinball table and saying, well, why can't I run a DisplayPort cable out the back of it and a USB hub and also play modern games on it because it's getting a 4080 Super? And then I thought, well, why don't I put a second graphics card in, a 9080 Ti, which is the last and fastest graphics card apart from a Titan X, that will have an analog connection, and I can do CRT gaming in that. So that's been my rabbit hole that I don't know whether it'll amount to anything, but maybe in a few months' time I'll be playing modern-ish games on a 21-inch CRT in 1600 by 1200 resolution. Maybe that'll turn out good. I don't know. But we should get on with the show because there has so much happened in the gap between the last show and this. There's so much to cover today. I've got a feeling we're going to go over the hour. I've already apologized to Duncan before we hit the record button. Sorry, Duncan. Here we go. In this section, we're going to talk about 4 new machines that have been announced. 3 of them submitted to the subreddit, and Reese has another one that we shouldn't miss out. We'll start off by talking about the Atari 7800 Plus before moving on to the news of 2 retro games machines. So the 2600 Plus has obviously been successful enough to continue with new products. The Atari have announced 8 new game carts along with the 7800 Plus console. Now, this isn't a mini. People tend to talk about it in the same way as they talk about a mini. I understand why. It's a modern remake of an old thing. But if it's anything like the 2600 Plus, it'll be the same size as a 7800 or slightly smaller, but not a mini. The 2600 Plus was a re-release of Atari's VCS, later known as the 2600. And this machine accepts full-size original cartridges, and on top of that allows them to release new cartridges. So you could buy the 2600 Plus and then go to flea markets, garage sales, you could go to all sorts of places, even eBay, and buy old cartridges, which, assuming the cartridge worked, of course, would work in the 2600 Plus. But they're also releasing new cartridges for it as well. It was also compatible with 7800 cartridges, which makes the 2600 Plus more like a 7800, because on launch, the 7800 was compatible with the 2600. So the 7800 Plus comes with one of the new games, which is Bentley Bear's Crystal Quest. Now, Bentley Bear was the star of Atari's early arcade game Crystal Castles. So this is somewhat of a sequel to that, although I don't think the gameplay is the same. And it also comes with a wireless 7800 pad. So this uses a 9-pin receiver on the back of the 7800 Plus, which makes me wonder, and I hope, Reese, if you ever do the review of this, you find out if it works on a Commodore 64 or an Atari ST, to see if the 9-pin receiver works that way. But what's interesting here is that, first of all, they're releasing the pads and the game separately, meaning that there's no need to buy the 7800 Plus if you want it. But it's the Atari Plus platform. Now, quoting Atari themselves, Atari Plus platform games and accessories are backward and forward compatible. Consoles, accessories, and games work together and are also compatible with most original accessories and cartridges. So what this means is that the 7800 Plus isn't a cash grab to sell another console to people who have the 2600 Plus. It's almost the opposite meaning, really, because if you have a 2600 Plus, which I do, you'll get the upgrades to the firmware and you'll have access to more peripherals improvements for it. And fundamentally, it won't matter which one you own. If you have a 2600 Plus, there's little reason for you to buy this 7800 Plus unless you want it as an ornament on your shelf. And if you don't have either of them, then you've now got the choice. Do you want the 2600 Plus shell? Do you want the 7800 Plus shell? Because inside there'll be, as far as I can see, there'll be the same thing inside. And which set of accessories do you want? The other 7 games that I've seen are Space Duel, Epix Games, M Network Collection, Caverns of Mars, Frenzy, Asteroids Deluxe, and Berserk 7800. So I'm quite looking forward to that coming out, although I definitely won't be buying it. I don't know if I want the wireless things, but I want the new games. I like the idea of buying a game and having the cartridge arrive. What do you think, guys?
I kind of look. I got a 2600 Plus, and I think I plugged it in. I poked it for about 5 minutes, and I packed it away. And that's because personally, I actually struggle with 2600 games. I think they're just. It was just before my kind of era, like immediately before. But I do actually have a 7800, like a genuine 7800. And it's actually quite a capable console. Look, I love the style and the history and everything behind the original VCS. I even bought the Lego VCS. Cool kit, by the way. The 7800 actually, even though I've got the 2600, the 7800 actually does interest me a bit because it was a rarer machine, right? They're nowhere near as common as the 2600. So I think for especially the hardcore Atari fans, I think a lot of them are actually going to want both for that reason. The fact that you know, it's not every day. Like, you can jump on Facebook Marketplace and find a dozen 2600s like now, right? But you struggle to find a 7800, let alone then mod it for decent output, video output, and all the rest of it. Yeah, I actually think Atari could be onto a bit of a winner here with the 7800, even though internally it's the exact same machine.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people seized on the fact it's basically a reshell of 2600 and said, oh, this is just a cash grab. I just don't agree with that at all. What do you think, Reese? Are you going to buy one?
Yes, I will. I will almost definitely be getting my hands on a 7800 Plus. I have the 2600 Plus. I also have the Lego set, and yep, I totally agree. It is amazing. My wife very kindly bought that for me for Christmas. So, but yeah, I'm up to my elbows in 7800s at the minute. I currently own 3 of them. 2 of them don't work, and yeah, if you watch my channel, you'll find out the story behind those shortly. But yeah, but. Again, you know, huge fan of the 7800 as a console. I think the Maria graphics chip was very, very capable for its time. Slightly let down maybe on the audio side of things, but yeah, there's a whole interesting story behind that I won't go into here. But yep, I will be picking up a 7800 Plus just to add to the collection, and if nothing else, it will look cool on the shelf next to its predecessor.
I did notice a tweet this week of someone making R-Type for the 7800. And it's just a work in progress. It's not anywhere near complete, and maybe they'll never complete it. But even at this stage, it looks much, much better than I thought was even possible in the 7800. It looks really like the arcade parallax scrolling and so on going on.
But so take, for instance, if this developer does finish the 7800 version of R-Type, how would you get it onto the 7800 Plus? Because as far as I'm aware, it still doesn't support flashcards.
This is one for Reese, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to. I mean, if you wanted to go down the DIY route, you'd have to burn it to an EEPROM yourself. But you never know, they might do a some kind of publishing deal. Someone like Songbird or someone like that do a physical release, maybe.
That'd be cool.
I think there's no reason why the 7800 plus and 2600 plus can't support flash-based ROMs or flash-based carts. However, they just need to be presenting the full image to it at boot and then configuring with dip switches to determine which bank of memory has been presented to the machine. And then the machine won't be able to tell the difference. So you could have one where I've got one for my GX 4000, best console ever made. I've got one from a GX 4000, which has a series of dip switches, and there's 16 you can select. One of them is actually a menu of things, but the other ones, if you select the other ones, it'll boot straight into the game. So you could do that with it.
Yeah, but those cartridges are still EEPROM based versus something like, I think what most people are looking for is to support something like a Uno cart, which takes like an SD card full of ROM files.
It's not EEPROM based. No, it's flash based.
Okay.
So it reads what's there and puts them into there, and you can select the dip. You can select the dip switch to show which one the GX 4000 can see. And the GX 4000, if you put it the right way, will just see one thing, and that's it, as if it was a normal cart. And that way is foolproof for the 2600 or the 7800 because the machine can't see anything else. You're not relying on an interactive flash cart.
I think at the end of the day, Atari just want to be able to sell their new carts.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I hope they come out with things like River Raid and so on. I mean, you would surely think they would eventually come out with the stuff that I want that way. Next up, though, is news from Retro Games. They've re-announced the full-size Amiga. They've hinted, and I'm not sure if they've fully announced this before, but this seems to be a later point in time than was previously expected, and it seems firmer. They're saying Q1 2025, presumably once the dust has settled after the next machine that's coming, they'll do this Amiga. However, a touch of caution, as I believe they have described it as a full-size Amiga console, so it's not yet entirely clear what that means. We could be getting like a CD32 instead. I very much doubt it. We'll get a CD32. I think what they'll give us is an Amiga with a keyboard. I would imagine that there's some appeal in making it A600 size rather than A500 or A1200 size. That they can drop the numeric keypad and flight sim fans can sit and cry, but otherwise it would still do the job. So thanks to Jason234 for spotting that on their Facebook page. I said they have announced it before and they've hinted at it, but it's never really felt. And lately it's been so long, it's felt, is this actually coming? Are they actually going to do it? Lots of interest in a full-size Amiga, a modern one like that, because it doesn't look like a mini. And of course it'll have HDMI, modern power supply, and flash storage, so it solves all the problems right away. And possibly you might end up using it as a shell for, I don't know, a Mister or something that looks like an Amiga. But I thought I'd save the biggest bit of news for last. And it's the Spectrum. Coming from the same company as the C64 Mini and then the C64 Maxi and the A500 Mini is the UK's most humblest micro, the rubber-keyed wonder, the Spectrum. Not the Sinclair ZX Spectrum. Just like their previous releases, they don't seem to have the rights for all of the branding. So this won't say Sinclair on it, which is a bit of a shame for me. Thanks to Chromatic Ore for submitting this, and then to Dr. Local, who beat 42 Nobody 42 with the launch video. The launch video doesn't have a lot of details in it. But for £90 in the UK, you'll get the Spectrum with its fully functional rubber keyboard. So presumably they couldn't make this any smaller than the original 48K Spectrum, or was the original 16K? Anyway, the original Spectrum.
Can you imagine how bad that keyboard would be if they shrunk it down?
The keyboard, I will say, I've been told this by people who had one back in the day, because the keyboard had lots of shortcuts on it. If you were writing programs on it, you quickly got used to it and found it was very effective. Yeah. It felt awful for me. Fully functional rubber keyboard, 48 games built in. And like other releases, when you switch it on, you'll get the carousel of games to navigate between and choose. You'll be able to sideload your own games by USB, so that's all the same. It'll be based on a system on a chipboard, so that's just an inexpensive way to do the emulation. But the emulation for the Spectrum is extremely mature. It's not really many disadvantages to emulating. And in fact, it's got advantages in terms of you can easily save states. And this one says you can rewind gameplay up to 40 seconds. So if you're playing Manic Miner and you don't have the patience of a 10-year-old as if it was 1984, then you can play Manic Miner and every time rewind. Rewind. And I bet it's still frustrating.
I've still never finished the first level.
Well, I can do the first level. I've said that. I wonder if I could load up the first level and get through it without losing a life this time. I don't know. It also comes with a special edition of Fusion Retro's Crash magazine. So Fusion have been for a number of years now been producing these A5 size mini mags, and the blurb calls it a mini mag. I subscribe to the main magazine, and I subscribe to Amtix, which has just recently finished after doing 12 issues. I won't list all 48 games, but the highlights for me are The Hobbit, Manic Miner, Head Over Heels, Starquake, The Lords of Midnight, loads of good games there. It's available to pre-order in the UK and in Europe, but seemingly not in North America, and I couldn't see it in Australia. Mr. Lurch, can you get it in Australia?
No. A few people have been in touch with the Gamesman, who was the main retailer for the other minis and so forth. And the response from the Gamesman is that their supplier not bringing it into the country. So I believe that everyone in Australia who wants one is ordering it through Amazon UK.
Fair enough. Well, you can get it from Amazon UK in the UK. I don't know what you'll do in North America. Maybe it'll be put across to there. It's an attractive little thing. I don't know why they have not got a sale. Maybe they will. Maybe it's only just been announced and it doesn't come out till November. So maybe it will be updated. Maybe they're still ironing out who's going to do that. 3 releases coming. What are your thoughts, Reese?
Yeah, loads of interesting mini PCs and mini consoles and things coming out. We had there was the X68000 was one that I really liked the look of a while back. But I also spotted another one that's been announced in the past couple of weeks, which is a mini PC88. If you know the NEC PC88, so it's called the Dempa Microsoft PC8801 Mark II SR. Very catchy name. It's quarter scale. And it has the thing about the 8801 Mark II SR is that it has the Yamaha YM2203 sound chip in it, which is quite sought after in the PC88 world. And it also has the Soundboard 2 YM2608. I should say, it has these things. It emulates these things. And it's actually the third in a series that they've done, which also included the Sharp MZ80 and the PC8001. So lots of iconic and esoteric Japanese machines, I guess, in that series. And I can only imagine that there'll be a PC98 at some point as well, which is one of my personal favorites. And as expected, it's got HDMI, it's got micro SD, it's got USB-C. And one of my favorite features of this thing is that it has miniature 5.25-inch floppies, and you can actually slot them into the drives. They don't actually work. They don't actually contain any data, but you can sit there and insert them into the little 1/4-inch scale disk drives all day long if you're into that kind of thing. And that's got 10 games, and it's coming out in the spring of next year for 33,000 yen, which is about £170.
I presume it's not on sale in the UK. You'll have to import it.
No, I think that's a Japanese exclusive, yeah.
Yeah, I would have loved the Mini X68000, but yeah, it ended up, by the time I found out about it, it was like Japan only and it all sold out.
Yeah. What do you think about the Spectrum then, Mr. Lurch? Is that up your alley?
It is. Actually, there's several like Pi Pico based ZX Spectrum projects out there. Right. And when you think about it, that's essentially what you're getting in this new retro games one. And I've actually kind of been toying with the idea of building one and all the rest of it, but I'm like, and I never get around to it because I always forget to order the PCBs, and then I've got to order the case and the keyboard and everything else from the UK, and it takes ages, and by that stage I've lost interest. So this is essentially, it sounds like that, right? That I can go to Amazon and go, click.
Yeah, and I think all the Pi-based stuff is fine, but this gets it in the box with the carousel, plug it in, and it works. The £90 release price, these have always dropped down in price. So the £90 release price might not be the final price you get it for. Maybe you'll get it for 65 quid on Amazon if you watch and you're patient enough, and you run the risk, of course, of missing out on it entirely. But for the price it is, even for the 90, it's fine. I mean, the Spectrum sold millions of units in the UK, not so much worldwide. The Timex, I think it was called the Timex something in North America, but that didn't do very well.
They sold a few in Australia.
Yeah. There are millions of Spectrum owners out there who had they maybe not own it anymore, but people who had one in their childhood in the 80s who maybe aren't into retro, who maybe aren't even into computers, who wouldn't know what an emulator is, where to find one, who wouldn't want to run it on a computer because they don't have one. Maybe they don't even have a laptop. Maybe they've just got the mobile. This is for them, I think, more than anyone else. They can go into a shop, plug it in, and even if they only get a dozen hours of it, it's still good fun for them. It takes them back to those times when they had Manic Miner in 1984. So I think it's good. Personally, though, I won't buy it. I've got a Next, and I've got a Plus 3, and I've got a Nouveau Plus 3 in a Metrum to build myself, and I've got a few Plus 2s, and I've got a few 48Ks. The only Spectrum I don't have that I like the look of is the toast rack, but I'm not going to get one of those just to have a toast rack. But I like I like this. The original Spectrum launched in 1982 for £125, which with inflation is £430 now. This is a fraction of that. So good luck to them all. I hope it works. I won't be buying the new 7800 Plus because I've got the 2600 Plus, but I'm pleased that my 2600 Plus is getting the upgrades, and I'll be buying the new games. I might buy the wireless controller. I don't know how I'm going to work with that, but I'll be buying new games. So bring it all on. I'm delighted to see it all.
Yeah, I am. The 7800 Plus, like I said before, I think I will probably end up picking one up just because it just looks so cool. The Specky, yes, definitely. I'll be picking one of those up. The full-size Amiga, I'm not sure. It depends on what they actually come out with. If it is something maybe 600. The problem is if they come out with a replica of the Amiga 600, no one's going to want it, right?
Oh.
But, well, people have got this distaste for the 600, let's be honest. I love it. But if they're going to really hit that nostalgia button, it's going to have to be the 500. Now, I think, the problem there is the fact that, the Amiga 500 was not a small computer, right? That's a big chunk of space that it took up, right? And what are you going to do? Stick in a little PCB about this big? Right? It starts getting a little bit ridiculous. I mean, obviously the keyboard will weigh a little bit, but, that's a lot of empty shell for a full-size Amiga 500.
Yeah. They could, I think the 1200 is slightly smaller than the 500, so they could do that. But again, it's not the 500. The 500 is the one that everyone had. I don't know. We will wait and see until they bring out a full-size CD TV. We are sponsored by PCBWay. Thank you very much for sponsoring us, PCBWay. PCBWay are a PCB manufacturing company that do much more than just PCBs. What else do they do, Rhys? Can you give me some examples, Rhys? Can you remember?
They do PCB assembly, they do 3D printing, injection molding, CNC, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, they work with metal and all sorts of stuff. Amazing company. Have a look at their shared projects. That's what I always go for, just for a little nosy. Lots of cool little devices you could build yourself. If you've never done any soldering and you want to do something, then pick up one of their little devices there to do as your first little project. Thank you very much for sponsoring us, PCBWay.com.
Way back in 2015, Valve, of course the infamous game studio behind Half-Life, Counter-Strike, Team Fortress, Portal, and indeed the Steam PC gaming platform, attempted to bring that platform to the living room via the medium of the Steam Machine, a PC-based console concept produced by various different PC hardware manufacturers, but all running Valve's Linux-based SteamOS. Unfortunately, I don't think the software side was quite there at the time. I've seen plenty of argument that many games actually run better under Linux than they do under Windows today, thanks to Valve's excellent open source Proton compatibility layer. But the world of Linux gaming was a very different place indeed 10 years ago, and I think maybe the technology and therefore consumer confidence wasn't quite there. So the Steam Machine concept kind of slowly fizzled out. But one thing that we did get out of it all was the Steam controller, which is still available today, although I should add that I do have one and I don't actually use it with my living room PC because I much prefer my ancient Xbox 360 controller and the 8-bit Do Ultimate as well. And of course, Valve eventually brought it all back in-house back in 2022 with the rather brilliant Steam Deck handheld PC. So the hardware may have changed, but SteamOS has lived on. And while there isn't necessarily an official distribution anymore that you can go and install on any old PC, its Linux-based open source roots mean that there are a few noteworthy community efforts to package up Valve's gaming-focused operating system on commodity hardware. And I did have a play with one quite recently called HoloISO, which I installed on my Atari VCS, and I can highly recommend it. It's much better than the kind of the stock OS that Atari included with it. And that brings me around to a story submitted by Savage Tech this week, all about a brand new living room focused Steam machine called the EmuDeck. Now, that name may sound familiar if you're a Steam user and a retro gaming fan, because EmuDeck has been around for a few years now in the form of a script that allows people to set up their favourite emulators and launchers under Steam and have it all neatly integrated. And it's a very cool project indeed that's well worth checking out. So EmuDeck's creator, Rodrigo Sedano, is crowdfunding this rather striking-looking piece of hardware that people are comparing to the Sega Dreamcast because, well, that's exactly what it looks like.
Not by accident, then.
I'm not sure if it's a deliberate homage or, I think it almost definitely is, isn't it? Hardware-wise, in the EmuDeck EM2, you get an AMD Ryzen 8600G, an overclocked Radeon 760M GPU, 16 gig of RAM and a 512 gig NVMe drive, and all the USB ports and Wi-Fi gubbins that you might expect. Prices start at £126 for a DIY kit, but that doesn't actually include any of the hardware that I just mentioned. That's basically just the shell, which takes a standard Mini ITX motherboard. Very important to point that out. And it goes all the way up to £640 for a fully built one with a Nova Lite controller, which does look like quite a nice little controller as well. And as mentioned, it's all Mini ITX, so basically you can upgrade it in the future and stick whatever Mini ITX based PC hardware in it that you like, which is quite cool. And if you're wondering why it's called the EM2, initially there was also an EM1, which was announced as a much lower spec model, which was built around Intel's N97 CPU with integrated graphics, which is a bit weird for a gaming-focused machine. And as expected, there wasn't really any interest in that at all. So that has officially been cancelled, and now their focus is fully on the EM2 with that Ryzen CPU. And as for the OS, they're running a custom SteamOS distribution called Bazite, which is based on Fedora Linux. And of course, it all comes fully set up and configured with Steam and EmuDeck for all of your retro needs as well. So, have either of you checked out Steam and Proton and gaming on Linux lately? And what do you think of this project?
Well, I've got questions. I've got loads of questions for you, Rhys.
Okay.
So, is this going to be running the same operating system that you get on a Steam Deck?
Yes and no. So Valve haven't actually officially released that. They used to. There used to be a repository where you could just go and download all the source code and stuff. But of course, it is all open source. So there are a couple of community efforts like this Bazite one. I must admit, I haven't checked out Bazite. So Yes, essentially it is the same, but the underlying OS is kind of slightly different. But obviously it's Linux, so it's all.
So what I'm asking here is, do you get all the benefits of what Valve have done? The Steam Deck is, for anyone who doesn't know, the Steam Deck seems to be a wildly successful release. People are delighted with these Steam Decks. They're doing all sorts of things with them. So are you going to get all the benefits of that Valve have done with the Steam Deck for compatibility and all the rest of it in a consoleized, almost like a PC format that'll connect to your TV? Is that what you're going to get from this? Is that the point of it?
Absolutely, yeah. So it is a consoleized Steam Deck, essentially, that you can plug into your PC. So all the tools and things that Valve have created for the Steam Deck have all been, I would say ported over, but not really, because it's the same platform. But yeah, it's all kind of integrated into this.
So that's interesting. So that then makes me wonder, what about getting a standard desktop case and putting a proper full-size PC in it? Would that then work as well?
Absolutely, yeah. So you can download Bazite or the one I mentioned, Hollow ISO. I think there's a couple of different sort of takes on this, and yeah, just install it, full-blown Linux operating system, and you've got the Steam big picture mode and all the customizations that Valve have done for the Steam Deck. So
that sounds interesting.
Why wouldn't you just get a little ITX kind of HPC with a half decent GPU and just do that?
Well, that is the question, because like I say, that's what I did with my Atari VCS, and that is now essentially a Steam machine. But I suppose with this...
So you can do that with it. You can put Steam on anything then?
Pretty much anything that will run Linux, yeah.
Okay. Shows you how out of the loop I am with Linux.
I've got to say, Fedora's an odd choice.
Yeah, because the original, the official, I think the Steam Deck itself runs Arch. Is it Arch? I think it used to be Debian.
Arch? I thought, if it just feels like these days everything is Debian based, that's all. My only real experience with Proton has been watching Sean's videos, so Action Retro. And he loves putting Linux and Steam on, well, pretty much anything. But I don't know. I mean, for me, at least, maybe it's just because I'm old, right? For me, PC gaming is a keyboard and mouse. So first-person shooter, keyboard and mouse, yada, 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 right? If I want to play something with a gamepad, then I really hate to say it, but just like Xbox and PlayStation pretty much got that market nutted.
So why would you buy this over an Xbox or a Play? Is it more powerful for what you for what you get your money's worth on it?
Different games.
I suppose.
Yeah,
but if you're going to do it in your living room on a controller, are you not going to be playing more kind of console style games anyway? You're not going to sit and play. You're not going to sit and play Pathfinder Kingmaker on your living room telly using an Xbox controller. I hope.
Yeah, I think for me, I don't have a current gen console, so my sort of living room gaming is all done on a PC, running Steam, running big picture mode. So it essentially is a console. And yeah, obviously I'll hook it up to a monitor and a keyboard and a mouse for like the new Doom games and that kind of thing. But to be honest, I spend all day sat at a desk, so sometimes it's nice to just kick back, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure. Again, this is a question, really. I'm not sure how comfortable I am with it being only Steam. I've just paid for Launchbox for the main PC I've been setting up, and one of the things I've noticed it does, as well as on that main PC, if I use it in my normal gaming PC, my 2018 built one, it will unify my launchers supposedly, so I could use it for GOG and Steam and have them all presented to me, rather than trying to remember which one did I buy this on. So would this tie me to Steam and only Steam, or can it run DRM free games through their compatibility layers?
Yeah, it's obviously the underlying OS is Linux, and it's all kind of open, so it's not locked down to Steam. You're not even locked down. It has a proper desktop environment and stuff on it as well. And that's kind of the point with EmuDeck as well, in that it kind of ties together, RetroArch and a few other sort of emulator platforms, and makes that all accessible through one kind of unified menu. as is my understanding. So yeah, very similar concept. But like you say, you can build this yourself. I guess the attraction of this is whether you're a fan of the specific hardware design, and it is essentially just a mini ITX PC inside. So if you wanted to install Windows or something else on it, it's completely open to do that as well, by the looks of it.
Can I give it a solid meh?
It's not for me. I mean, but then again, consoles aren't for me. And I'm not a console gamer, so it's not for me. And I'm just trying to think outside of my own box and trying to think of how would someone else like it. And I guess if you want Steam, Steam, there's so much more indie gaming on Steam than there is on Xbox and PlayStation. So this, I guess, would give you access to all that indie gaming. And I guess maybe that's where the appeal is. Maybe you say, look, I'm fed up with all these battle royale games, and I'm fed up with all these identical games that come out that are just copies of each other. I want the access to the indie thing. Well, maybe that's for you. And if you don't want to sit at a PC because you've been there all day, maybe that's the selling point for it. Maybe that's why you would buy this.
I think a big part of the appeal for Steam, part of the appeal of Steam for me is that obviously I've had it since Half-Life 2 came out. So, I mean, when was that? That was like 2004-ish, something like that. And I've just got
Showing your age.
So many, yeah, I know. So many games on there, such a massive sort of back catalogue of games. And of course, they all still work today. It's not like having a current gen console where, they've got some degree of backward compatibility, but it's kind of not 100%. That's kind of one of the big benefits of Proton as well, of sort of Valve's compatibility thing. It is really excellent from what I've tried. It does generally sort of run everything very well. So.
See, for me, my Xbox in the lounge room is basically a media center, right? I don't have time these days to play console games, but it runs, Netflix and Disney Plus and Prime Video and, all that kind of stuff. And it actually makes a really good media center, right? I'm just talking about like the original Xbox One, and that's kind of the extent of it these days.
Thank you for allowing us a week off. I thought I'd try and keep housekeeping short this week because there is so much to cover in this show. I have spent some of the patron money on a new microphone. I hope that you hear a positive difference in the sound. Please do let us know if there's anything that doesn't sound right about it this week. If I'm glitching out or whatever, let us know, but hopefully it's much smoother and warmer for you. If you want to join our patrons, then you can go to patreon.com/thisweekinretro and sign up to join the ranks of the twirlers. We had an unexpected cameo in LGR's latest video. His convention road trip to New York City and Long Island Retro. I put it on to watch. I was sitting watching it. He's driving a car, so my eyes aren't on the screen, and then suddenly I can hear my own voice. What? Turns out he was listening to This Week in Retro in his car, and that made it onto his edit of the video there. So that was quite surreal, watching an LGR video and then suddenly hearing my own voice. I know you're listening, Clint, so hello, Clint. How you doing? And I had a quick look at the comments, and at least half a dozen twirlers had already commented on hearing Reese and I on there. So that was quite surreal. Link in the show notes to that video if you'd like to see it. Something we must cover, though, is the DE10 clone from Taki Udon. So this week's theme seems to be new machines. And we've covered this before in previous episodes. So I thought I should give you a bit more of an explanation in case it flies over people's heads. The Mister project uses FPGA to emulate old systems, and it's widely felt to be more accurate and have less latency than other ways of doing it. I don't want to dwell too much on that because there's lots of debate there, but Lots of people love Mister. I love Mister as well. As a result, it's been very successful, but it isn't cheap. It relies on a project board called a DE10 Nano, and they've gone up and up in price, and they currently cost, I think, 230 American dollars. Now, you need this DE10 Nano along with an expansion board for your I/O connections, and for most of the cores in it, you need a memory board as well. So this makes it very expensive. Now, tech YouTuber Taki Udon has created a clone of the DE10 Nano, which he intends to sell for less than $100. Now, that's a staggering reduction, but that's not even the whole story. He's also doing the memory at much less than usual. So for $111 is the launch price, you get the board and the memory. So the board and the memory is everything you need to do, mister. And for $156 for the mega pack, which will, I think, give you the I/O board, so you've got more connectivity and a USB hub, I think. $156 for a complete Mister setup is incredible. It's going to change things in the Mister landscape. Mister, everybody wants Mister until they see the price, and then, oh, maybe I'll not get it now. This is going to be absolutely incredible. It's a fantastic project, not just because it's FPGA, but I like the UI of it. You switch it on, you've got a list of the cores. You can go in and play a game right away. It's not fancy. It's just a text list of games. It works really well. I've always said that this feels so good that I'm not sure if it's going to end up being true. It just felt such a groundbreaking change.
I do have one question. Is the footprint the same? And where I'm going with this is, has anybody asked Richard if it will fit in the Mr. Multi-system?
So the footprint is the same. And I've asked Richard, Richard at Heber, the company that share the mill with Neil. If anyone remembers Neil. Does anyone remember Neil? Neil used to be on this show.
Never heard of him.
I've asked Richard if this will fit in it. He believes it will. Richard is waiting on getting one. He'll get one soon, I believe. I think Taki might even be sending him one ahead of the normal orders. So Richard will find if it is compatible, if there's any issues. So it sounds like it will be compatible, but we don't really know. As for the whole thing, it almost feels too good to be true. So all the way through, I've been saying, well, let's hang on. Let's see if they manage to get it into people's hands. But at every step of the way, it's looked professional. It's looked competent. It's looked honest. It doesn't look to be as if there's anything dodgy here. There's a couple of snags. CE approval. So European certification is needed, so that's about a week of delay. But then another delay came after that, which was the memory board. Now, the memory board, they had originally designed their own replacement memory board, but they've gone back to the original memory board. But the silt screen has been removed, which gives credit to the creators. Now, that mustn't be removed. You shouldn't take someone else's design and remove their names from the silt screen, of course. So Taki Udon has said he refuses to sell this, so the whole launch is on hold until that's sorted. I expect, and this isn't them saying this, I expect they'll change the silt screen for future production runs, and the ones that are already made, they'll just put a sticker on it. That seems like the answer to it. Put the sticker on it with the credits on it. This is the first hint of anything going wrong with this, really. So I'm still on board. This still looks great. A few weeks of delay won't matter. And if this gets this thing into people's hands for such a low cost, it will be absolutely incredible. Amazing at this price. Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I remember when the multi-system came out, and I'm just like, "Ooh, this is awesome! I want one of these." Yada yada yada. And then I started like pricing it up, and it just like the cost of entry, I think, for a lot of people, myself included, is just it's too much.
I love
unless you're like really hardcore into it.
Well,
like I think we all understand it's an amazing platform. Don't get me wrong, but it's I think for a lot of people, it's hard to justify that high price, that high point of entry.
I mean,
something that you think you might want to use.
Yeah, a Pi's great and a Pi's cheap, or a PC emulation is great and cheap. The Mister, at least I can say for the Mister, it's a full package. It works well. It's low latency, and it won't go obsolete. I mean, it's not as if there's going to be a better. It's just having a better thing that makes yours stop working. So you could buy this and still be using it years later, but it isn't cheap. So I'm delighted to see the price come down on this to something that it's approaching at $156. That's approaching the kind of, well, just buy it price.
Yeah, and that was kind of my point, was that like currently, right, using the Intel DE10, you look at the pricing and you kind of, if you're not 100% committed, you look at the costs and you kind of start going, maybe is something I can really justify spending on, right? But because if this does all pan out, by lowering that cost of entry, I think it's going to open it up. I think it's going to be amazing.
By the time you take the cost of memory, the savings on memory, the memory board, and the savings on the D10, you're knocking $150 off the price.
Yeah, because I think most people do recognize that the Mister is that head and shoulders above normal emulation.
We'll go on to Dave's briefs now. And I hope you're braced for a data blast, folks, because there's absolutely loads of them because we've been off and so much has been happening. So thanks to 42 Nobody 42, someone has put Doom on a McDonald's ordering screen. So those kiosks you get, those great big monitors, someone's put Doom on one of those.
Fireaxis preserves Sid Meier's $10,000 386 that he used to make Civilization on.
Fireaxis.
That'll do.
Yeah, so they've got his original 386 and they've preserved it, so that's quite interesting. Specific Low has linked Rose Tinted Spectrum's Games Master Series 2. That video is doing great, just like the first one. It's such a time capsule, and Rosie manages to walk the line between mocking it and loving it really well. It was on here just a few weeks ago. Fantastic video.
Yeah, I do enjoy Rose Tinted Spectrum's interesting commentary on old 1990s kids' TV shows. 42 Nobody 42 posts that England's least visited tourist attraction is the Computer Sheds, which only had 35 visitors last year, and it actually looks really good. So it's in East Yorkshire, and it's quite conveniently located. So go check it out.
That's a bit sad.
I know, it's a bit sad, and it looks like a decent thing to go to, and it'll end up getting 35,000 this year because it's been in all the papers, and everybody's going to go, well, I'm going to go there.
All right. Everyone start giving that place a shout out in their videos and their social media. Let's get them some more visitors.
G7VFY lets us know about the famous Computer Cafe, which was a radio show from the United States of America in the California area that ran for 3 years, but 3 really important years in terms of computer development. So 1983 to 1986. So thanks to a GoFundMe, the archives have been digitized and put onto the Internet Archive. I'll definitely be getting these. There's interviews like Bill Gates, Jack Tramiel, Douglas Adams, although not all of them survived. Gene Roddenberry, for example, was lost. There are 53 episodes that made the archive. This will actually come up on the final story we do today, but it is so much different if you go back to the actual media from the time compared to watching YouTube videos and reading stuff now. So yeah, I'll definitely be listening to these. Amazing.
Weeping Scorpion 1982 links a video from Reinfused, which gives the history of Amstrad's 8-bit micros.
Sybil66 has created a thread about pirating tales. I love reading people's stories about how they got a hold of software. And he talks about his friend who was definitely a Dell boy in the making. It's an interesting read if you want that.
And a few months ago, we talked about TV broadcasting software through a flashing dot on the screen. And Perry Fractic has tried it on his channel. Thanks to Dr. Fudge Knot for that one. Have to be careful how you say that one.
Christ, why don't you sends us a link to an IGN article about Nintendo's upcoming museum scheduled to open in October this year. October the 2nd. I think it's in Kyoto, obviously in Japan. Loads of stuff in there. So it made me think, is this Nintendo looking more back to their retro roots? Are they going to finally announce the SNES Mini? Maybe. Real carts, please. And there is loads more. There's so much that happened the past couple of weeks. So thank you to everybody for submitting stuff. If you want to go and see what's been submitted, submit your own things, comment on them, like, subscribe, whatever, then go to reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro. I hope not to lose any friends over this next section, but I'm going to give you my opinion regardless. I'm going to be honest. When I've done research into the Amiga, I found that there's a lot of nonsense talked, a lot of circular references, a lot of people with not quite correct information on things. When you look at Moby Games, for example, the Amiga is listed as a lead platform for games that were launched on the ST first or developed on both the ST and the Amiga. It seems that Amiga fans have spent 3 decades rewriting history a little bit. And if I go back to issues of Byte magazine from the mid-80s, things are different to how it's told now. Or in fact, if I listen to that radio show, I might find things are different. But I don't think it's anyone's fault. This isn't a conscious effort to go out there and erase history or change it. I think it's just what happens over time. Mr. Lurch, you had a face there that made me think you weren't quite believing me there. Do you think it's a conscious effort?
You don't think the hardcore Amiga fanboys are out there trying to rewrite history and put down the ST?
I don't think they're gonna. I don't think they're writing books about it. I don't think anything Moby things. I know that if you have an ST video on the internet, then you'll get Amiga fans coming saying, "Yeah, but the Amiga." Okay, I do really like a deep dive, and I like things being debunked, and that's just what this submission from Chromatic Ore does. It's a video from the fantastic YouTube channel called Ahoy. I'll watch anything he does. Fantastic. And he's titled his video, "How Many Amigas Did Commodore Really Sell?" And I could kind of spoil his video here by telling you the content of it, and it would make this show more interesting by doing it, but it's not fair to do it. So I'm not going to tell you exactly what's in the video. And what the journey was and the story of how he got to his answer, because the journey and the story and the things he's debunked along the way are possibly more interesting than the final answer. But it's a fascinating video, only 15 minutes. Ahoy is always compelling. If you start to watch this, you'll watch the whole thing. But what I will say is I'm fully on board with his answer. We will not get a more complete, and he has thoroughly corroborated his answer, so there's no clickbait. He really does answer the question. I think you guys have watched the video. Do you agree with me that he's got a solid answer?
Yeah. I don't know if I'd go as far as debunked. I would say clarify a lot of the data that has been kicking around over the last 30, 40 years.
There was the figures that he found. That was the figure that he kept finding being quoted. He eventually got to the bottom of what that figure was, and it wasn't even Amigas.
No, it was like all Commodore sales.
Yeah.
I really liked the video. I liked the way he went digging through, like even bidding on eBay for documentation to really get to the truth. I think the methods he used to extrapolate out some of the unknowns were solid. I really couldn't make any, like I'm not a mathematician or a statistician, but it made sense to me. And yeah, there was a few things I found kind of interesting, some specifics. Especially to do with like some of the later stuff.
Yeah, how little there was later stuff. There's the SCOM stuff. They really didn't sell very many. No,
I mean, without spoilers, I'll go into this last one though, because it's something that I'm personally interested in. Is that the final figures? Okay, so when SCOM took over, bought all the stuff and relaunched the Amiga, and they relaunched the Amiga 1200 and the 4000T. And I've read numbers, and I think if you go to the 4000T Wikipedia page, it basically says somewhere between 5 and 20,000 units were made, right? That's a pretty broad number. And we're still not 100% sure on how many Commodore made, because the numbers seem to be bundled just into the 4000, right? But we find out how many SCOM made, and it's not 5 to 20,000, put it that way.
Yeah, it's the 4000T. Is that peak Amiga?
Yes, basically. In my opinion, it is. It's the granddaddy.
That's the final big daddy Amiga.
Well, it is. Yeah, I do actually. It's sitting right next to me. You can see it there. There's the door of it. If we've got time, there's a little bit of a story behind this one.
Tell the story. It's a good story.
All right, tell the story. Right. So several years ago, a mate of mine, Jason, another Jason.
Everyone's called Jason Shane in Australia.
Yeah.
Shine, Jason.
Shine, Bruce, Bob. I get a message from it. I get these messages just because being on YouTube and all the rest of it's going like, hey, I've got this old Amiga. Do you want it? And I'm like, yeah, sure, right? And because he was living in Sydney at the time. And he's like, oh, it's in my parents' place down in Melbourne. And, next time I'm down there, we'll dig it out and yada. And it just kind of never happened. And every time he did go down there, he'd get busy and it just blah, blah, blah. And this kind of dragged on for a few years. And he actually ended up moving to Melbourne for jobs across this, because we're talking the span of about 4 or 5 years. Anyway, and then I got only earlier this year, kind of March or April-ish this year, I get a message from Jason on Facebook going, hey, I'm at my parents' place. We've finally dug out this Amiga. I went, oh, cool. Then he sends me a photo. It's a boxed 4000T. And I'm like, dude, like, this thing's worth like a serious amount of money. Like, we posted up, like, even back in the day, someone dropped well north of 10K on this machine in Australian dollars, right? It's probably worth nearly that now. And I'm like, dude, this is worth like things. He's just like, no. I just wanted to go to a good home. I don't have the room. I just want it out of here. We need to tidy up my parents' place, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so this was just leading up to the Canberra Vintage Show back at the end of June. And a mate of mine was actually coming up from Melbourne to be part of the show. And I'm like, can you like go pick this thing up for me and bring it up? Because shipping was going to cost a bomb. It's like, yeah, I'll go get it. Anyway, so Jason and Dave teed something up. Anyway, so the day Dave got it, I get a message from him going, because it's all boxed. He's like, can I take it out of the box? And I'm like, yeah, go, send me photos, whatever. Anyway, so he's got it out of the box and he's pulled the cover off it. And all of a sudden the Facebook chat's gone quiet. I'm like, dude? Hello? Anyway, and he's just started sending me photos, just bombing me with photos of the insides of this machine. The thing's loaded with like a Phase 5 060 like proper accelerator, a Cybervision 64 3D, network card, like 3 obviously dead SCSI drives and all the rest of it. Like, this thing's loaded. Anyway, we worked out very quickly it had a dead power supply, so it's just a standard AT power supply. Swap that out. And he literally video called me on Facebook as he hit the power button for the first time, and up came the Kickstart 3.1 Kickstart screen. It just booted straight into life. And it came with the keyboard, the mouse, all the documentation, the whole lot. Now, I did go asking. So the 4000T was never actually sold in Australia, like distributed in Australia. And so, yes, this one was actually a UK import. I think I found another half a dozen across Australia that are still kicking. Some of them are UK, some of them are German imports. One is actually a Quick Pack, who were the very, very short-lived producers after ESCOM went bust. But I even asked Jason, I'm like, why? Like, because this would have been 95, 96, right? So the writing was already on the wall. Like, Commodore had already gone bust, right? Because this is an ESCOM machine. And I'm like, why did you buy this, right? Because, like, depending on what he actually wanted to do, like, you put together a 486 for a fraction of the price that would eat this, right? So as an example, that Cybervision card that's in there, it's an S3 Verge DX with like 4 meg of RAM, like what we really consider generic display adapter, right? And that would have been a several $1,000 RTG card just because it's got put into Amigas. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's amazing, and it's fantastic to be able to run some ridiculous software on period correct hardware, but you do kind of wonder why would you have actually bought this then, unless you were hardcore into video production, right? Which was about the only little niche market that people would have still been interested in, which I can only assume that was Jason's reason.
Is there anything on the hard disk that gives it that tells it away?
No, all 3 drives were dead. Typical old SCSI drives, they're all toast.
Yeah.
So since then, it's got a blue SCSI, which are just amazing devices. I swapped out the CD-ROM, and the whole thing has been professionally recapped. Typical capacitor plague era. I could have done it, but being such a rare, expensive machine, I didn't want to take the chance of it up, right? And so just locally in Canberra is Jeremy, who does this professionally as it's a side business, but he does it professionally. So I just went, here, you take this and my wallet and you go and recap this for me. Thank you. But yeah, it's an amazing machine. And it really is the absolute daddy of original Amigas.
And now you know that it's even more rare than what you thought it was.
Exactly. Thank you, Ahoy.
Yeah. A super important thing for me is I learned when the Amigas were sold. There's this big thing made out about a rivalry between the Atari ST and the Amiga. And yes, it can be a bit of good fun. It's also incorrect. The Atari ST peaked and faded before the Amiga peaked and faded. I've always thought that was the case. The Atari ST and the Amiga did compete for a very short time, kind of 1989, 1990, 1991. But what this data proves that while the Amiga was in the ST shadow until it reached a tipping point, and then people bought the Amiga rather than the ST because it was an Amiga. But if you think about it, the fact that what this data shows is the majority of Amigas were sold in the 90s. Prior to 1990, you went into a computer shop and you saw an Atari ST and Amiga running next to each other. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference, really, apart from the price and the package that you got, because the ST was significantly cheaper. And as the Amiga got closer in price, the ST got more games in the pack. And because the games up until the end of the 80s, the games were made for the ST or made for the ST and Amiga and held back to make sure they worked on the ST, the Amiga games wouldn't look better. And this is the data that shows that the majority of Amigas were sold after 1990, and if you look at what happened before it, it was a slow increase until it got to that point finally. So I'm quite interested to see that, and really it just shows that you had the ST and then you had the Amiga. The Amiga is a more capable machine than the ST, but until you convince people it was, people wouldn't buy it. So I thought that was fascinating. Reese, did you watch it?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I love Ahoy. I think it's an absolutely fantastic channel, and I love all the work that he puts into his videos. Obviously, he did that one about cannon fodder and about the whole controversy around the poppy and stuff. Yeah, a few months back. So I really enjoyed that one. So yeah, it's one of those channels where as soon as a video pops up, I have to sort of drop everything and watch it. But I loved where this was coming from. Obviously, where he was kind of coming from with trying to correct the misinformation and stuff that's out there. Because I've been on a very similar journey myself. Because you do end up in this situation with, particularly with like YouTube, where people will just read the Wikipedia page and they'll watch other people's videos and they'll just kind of repeat everything, and then that kind of becomes the narrative and the kind of the gospel.
It is circular reference. It's circular references. I've used that term. Is that even the right term? But I want to describe what I mean by that. What I mean is that there's one bit of information out there, and it ends up in someone's book or on a Wikipedia page, and then that ends up in 2 or 3 videos or in a blog, and then people can then say, here's 6 or 7 different citations all saying the same thing that proves this is true, and then it's only come from one little bit of information that was wrong.
Yeah, well, I went on a similar journey with the Atari Panther a couple of years ago. So it was a console that was being developed by Atari in the 80s, and it was going to compete with the Mega Drive and the SNES, and got cancelled in the end. And there was a magazine article sort of 20 years ago that included some speculation and stuff about some of the games that were under development and stuff like that. And the content of that actually ended up on the Wikipedia page for it. And you go and look up any YouTube video about the Atari Panther, and they're just all spouting the same information about certain games that were started on that console and then ended up on the Jag and stuff like that. So I went and started doing my own digging, went into old forum posts and old interviews and that kind of thing, and found out that actually a lot of it just wasn't true at all. And I started to put it all together on my website. And I've got this absolutely, I mean, this is a bit of a plug, but absolutely epic article that cites all of its sources and stuff, just full of historical information about the Panther. And it actually resulted in, firstly, it resulted in most of the Wikipedia page being deleted. So about 90% of it is gone now, because it disproved all of that. But also I was contacted by one of the guys from Games That Weren't. If you've come across gamesthatweren't.com, they also did a book with Rom, I think. They basically do research into games that have been cancelled and stuff like that. And he contacted me. He'd actually just sort of randomly stumbled across this and said, I absolutely love what you're doing here. And we've got loads of stuff in our archives all about the Atari Panther. Do you want to include it on your page? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. I want to kind of set the record straight and create this kind of historical document. And he sent over a load of stuff about games that are in development and a load of historical interviews and stuff like that. So once you start digging into these things, it's actually really, really interesting. So yeah, I absolutely 100% on board with where Ahoy was coming from with this, and really great to see sort of that historical record being set straight.
Well, I wonder then how accurate or inaccurate some of the other sales figures that we kind of take for granted, like the Atari ST sales figures. We just take these numbers for granted because, there they are on Wikipedia or whatever.
Yeah.
So there you go. There you go, Reese. There's another future project for you.
Yeah, I mean, the another one that mildly annoys me is 8-Bit Guy did a video on the Amiga 1000, and he went to Wikipedia and lifted the launch price for the Amiga 1000, then compared it against the Atari ST and the Apple Mac, comparing these 3 68,000 base machines, and said the Amiga was a low-cost machine. But he compared the Amiga without a monitor against the two prices of the Atari ST with a color monitor and the Apple Mac, and when you do that, it was, the information was wrong, but then that becomes the source for someone else to do something else. And I don't think for a moment the 8-Bit Guy was trying to put misinformation out there. I don't think that when we talk about Reese and his Atari Panther stuff, I don't think anyone was trying to mislead people with that. They were just doing it in good faith, but you can see the kind of snowball effect of these circular references ended up creating this massive amount of information that if you go down low enough, there's almost nothing there.
And if you actually go back to Neil's, so Neil did a series, was it last year or whatever, and it was one of his treasures on the Amiga 1000, right? And it was that series where he went through the magazine articles of the day and yada, yada, yada. And what Ahoy's video showed from a sales number perspective is it basically backs up what Neil was saying, is that, like, in 1985, 86, like, which one would you actually buy, right? And, you know, as much as the hardcore Amiga fanboys don't want to admit it, that the Amiga 1000 was not a successful machine, right?
It was an
proved a point.
incredibly powerful machine, but who was it for?
Well, that's what I'm saying. From a sales point of view, right, and actually trying to bring income into Commodore, right, it wasn't a success. It proved an amazing technical point, don't get me wrong, but wife delivering me snacks. But even before the Amiga 500 came out and started actually momentum, Atari already had the 1040 out by then. So when you're looking at a 68,000 base 16-bit machine with 1 meg of RAM, you know, what are you really going to choose back in the day? And the sales figures show that it wasn't until the 500 hit and then started to get bundled up with these awesome games packs. It wasn't until then that Amiga really hit its stride from a sales perspective.
Yeah, and it makes me think to the Scottish Amiga users group. The guys in that, almost all of them didn't get their Amiga until 1991, 1992, 1993, and I'd already had my ST and moved on. So this idea that the ST and Amiga were in this battle to the death is just not true. The two machines coexisted, and the ST had its time, and then the Amiga had its time, and the flame wars are unnecessary. Anyway, watch Ahoy's video. It's fantastic. You'll learn something, and you'll get to enjoy his journey as he goes along it. Last week's question of the week was, are you going to leave Windows? Have you left already? And if so, how did that affect your retro life? And it was based on the idea that I felt towards the end of the 90s, everyone, or the year 2000, everyone was on Windows, and then now it's starting to drift away from that. So the top answer is from Vegetable Message 22, and he says, just to prove me wrong, he says, I never did the switch to Windows. I stuck with Amiga until the end of the 90s and then jumped onto Linux. Even managed to stay out of using Windows at work as well. For me, Linux is a lot better for retro setups, as it can easily be very fast and invisible. So it looks like you're using a real Amiga or whatever retro you're into. However, for music production and video editing, the M series Mac is my poison. So there we go. Someone stayed off Windows. Reese, would you like to read out the next one?
So from a friend of the show, Richard Shears, I've switched over to Linux recently and was surprised how easy it was. Nobara was my initial choice, and it's great for first-timers. And I have just had a look at Nobara, and apparently it's based on Fedora Linux. So that's the second Fedora shout-out in this episode. Steam works flawlessly for me. However, it's not really affected my retro gaming, as I have the luxury of original hardware and prefer this option personally. However, as I'm no millionaire and space is a premium, so I don't have every system I have a passion for, but that's where the Mr. Multi-system comes in. Minimal compromise using FPGA is a genuine joy.
Jason, would you like to read the next one?
The next one being Frosty Cheesecake 954. I switched to Linux in 2020, a lockdown project, unsurprisingly, and can't see me turning back. My living room PC is running Ubuntu, and I haven't encountered any problems using Proton in Steam to run games that don't have native Linux compatibility. For emulation, it's Linux again with an Odroid N2 Plus running Batacera. It even has plug-and-play functionality for my Sinden light gun, which is great. The only piece of original retro I have is my Specky, so it's not really part of the conversation. Overall, I would thoroughly recommend picking the Penguin.
Does that mean anything to you, Jason?
No.
There's a biscuit. It's kind of similar to a Tim Tam in the UK called a Penguin. And the advert for it is pick up a penguin.
Okay.
That's what that was.
I bet the Tim Tam's better.
I've had a Tim Tam, yes. I could eat a whole packet of penguins, but I couldn't eat a whole packet of Tim Tam. Tim Tams are richer, but I bought Tim Tams because I heard Australians talking about them. I bought them maybe a year ago, and they're quite good. There are lots of answers there. I left Windows years ago. I never switched to Windows. I switched completely to Linux in 2015. No, I won't switch away from it. Lots of answers there. So yeah, I just have this feeling that lots of people are drifting away from Windows now. I'm not sure I will. Lots of people drifting away. On to this week's question of the week. And we've just had a lot of new machines come out. So let's ask our listeners and viewers, what machine would you like to get the remake treatment, either in a mini format or in the format that takes cartridges? What is crying out to get your £100 of money for?
The correct answer being the Atari ST.
Go to the Jaguar. That's what I want, a mini Jag.
Oh, a Jaguar mini. Yeah, okay.
Cartridges. I think the one that the world needs is a SNES Mini. A SNES or a Mega Drive Mini would sell fortunes if they use cartridges. If you want to answer that question, go to reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro. That's us this week. I hope you enjoyed a slightly longer show, making up for missing last week. It's difficult to have only a slightly longer show and not a massively longer show with Mr. Lurch here, because Mr. Lurch always has lots to say. Thank you very much for being on. I hope you enjoy coming on, Jason. I hope you'll come on again. Welcome back to the retro world. Maybe we'll see a video sooner or later.
Yeah, let's see how we go. If you keep your eye on the retro channel, Mark and I have got some ideas for me to do some guest stuff on there. As for the mini computer, my answer is going to be okay. So you know how when they did the NES Mini, I think it was the NES Mini, and you could get the Famicom Japanese version or you could get the NES version, right? In America, do the Tandy Coco, and in the UK, the Dragon 32 Mini.
Oh, that's a clever idea. Yeah, yeah, because they are fundamentally the same thing, really.
There you go. I think there's something there.
Reese, are you on the Jaguar or the ST? Which is it? Or the Falcon?
Yeah, I suppose with the ST, of course, there's already the Amiga Mini, so
yeah, most of the games are on there.
Yeah. Whereas the Jaguar's quite a unique and interesting machine, I guess.
Yeah, and, make it take original cartridges and then don't sell any cartridges. Just make the used Jaguar cartridge market go mental. Anyway, we had better finish. We'd better finish. So join in on the question of the week. Submit your articles. Thank you very much for watching. We will see you next week. Next week, I don't know who the guest is yet. It will be Reese, though. And I don't know if we're going to get. I don't know what we're going to do for a guest. We'll get a guest. Haven't sorted the shuffling around yet. But see you next week, twirlers. I'm waving. Reese is waving. We've got a salute from Lurch, and now we're getting a wave, a frenetic wave. See you next week, folks. Bye.
This Week in Retro was presented by Neil from RMC The Cave and Dave. It was produced by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcaster, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/thisweekinretro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
What snacks did you get brought?
Twisties.
Never heard of Twisties.
Is Twisties isn't an Australian thing, is it?
Yeah, Twisties an Australian thing.
I didn't know that.
Never heard of
Open
it.
the packet, shows a Twisty. Inquiring minds need to see what a Twisty is.
It's a twisty. Like a cheese
Oh.
snack.
Oh,
Like
it's a what's it? In America, they're called Cheetos. In the UK, they're called What's-Its.
Yeah,
And
except they're a long, kind of twisted up looking thing.
they look a bit like knickknacks as well.
Like a knick-knack. That one's quite phallic.
Yeah.